My, I think there are some of the authors who would argue that it's always there and that you're just becoming in tune to it. But I'm of the opinion, my current opinion is that it is something that increases. I think it is something that is somehow intelligent, that is responding to us. And I think my own personal experience with it has been the more you almost communicate with this field of information, the more that it's responding back to you. So I would argue that that's been my personal experience. I can give, and then there's things like people talk about with the internet, that we're all just sharing common memes and so on, that a lot of this stuff is almost like a mind virus. So certainly, and if people were looking at a movie that's coming out now, a common argument is, well, you're just picking up the trash that Hollywood's putting out and they want you to be thinking these things. Mm-hmm. But the personal experience is what, to me, says that's not the complete answer. And there might be cases of that, certainly. But I feel like that's not the case. I had, basically when I was putting this book together, I spent a few months just working on the book where I didn't work on anything else, and I was just doing that. And then I was basically broke after a few months, and I had to go back to work, and I started working at this restaurant. And there, next, 2 doors down from the restaurant was some thrift store. And I happened to be going to work that day, and I was thinking all about the phi ratio and just different ideas of this fractal nature and all these sort of things. And that's what was on my mind as I'm taking the train to work. And I get to work a few minutes early, and I happen to walk into the thrift store, and they had a box of $1 used books. And I found 6 books in this box about the phi ratio. And I said, wow, okay, that's really cool. And I hadn't gone to work yet, so I was like, I'll come back tomorrow when I have money, and I'll buy some of these books. That's just great. And I just saw it as a tiny little thing. And then the next day, I don't know, whatever I was thinking about, I might have been thinking about, I don't know. Pick something at random. I happened to go to work, and I stopped into this bookstore to buy the books under the phi ratio. Guess what? Those books weren't there. But there were 5 books on the subject that had been on my mind that day.
Right.
And so a completely new box of books, but all incredibly relevant to what I was thinking about. And this happened day after day after day after day during a time period where I was completely not online. And these are all old books, so it wasn't like just things that Hollywood culture creators are putting out into the popular consciousness. These were just sort of random topics that I happen to be musing on while I have a 40-minute train ride. I have things to think about, just sort of you let your mind wander. And lo and behold, those books would be there every day. I ended up never buying a single one. It was just sort of the confirmation for me, the real information came from the fact that the books were there. I didn't necessarily need the information inside of them. To me, the ultimate answer was that those books were there. And that, to me, was evidence enough of a phenomenon that was incredibly powerful and was meant for me personally. And perhaps someone else was having the same experience with that same box of books. Or perhaps someone else is having the same experience with, their local bookstore, whatever it might be. I think it's a uniquely tailored conversation for each person. So what speaks to me might not speak to you, but that to me was a pretty profound experience, and it's gotten to the point where I have experiences like that on a regular basis. So I definitely think it's something that increases.
Interesting. People are talking about waking up or moving towards a broader awareness, consciousness, basically, in that sense, and this is a huge part of it. I think it's well, if you want to be in one sense boast about it, it is a new frontier in human consciousness, at least beginning to interact with it in that way. It's applying Carl Jung's ideas of synchronicity onto everyday life. This idea that everything has a meaning, as long as you're there to spot it or to see it, basically. And I think I want to just read this because you're opening the book with a statement from Jake Kotze, and he, I personally see him as being a pioneer, if you will, in the subject matter. He is obviously caught on from a lot of other people that did this kind of work before him, but he's taking it into a new kind of area, if you will. But I'm just going to read this for our listeners here, Alan.
Please do.
Nothing in existence is fundamentally divisible or separate. All things and events, even the observer of things and events, are part of an inseparable union. Synchronicity happens when we notice the bleed-through from one seemingly separate thing into another, or when we for a brief moment move beyond the mind's division of the world. Synchromysticism explores this phenomenon, the interpretation of all things, and seeks to increase the ability to recognize relationships by relaxing the rigid conceptualization of the world. This inevitably leads to a more joyful and whole everyday experience, as the environment and person experiencing that environment become a part of conscious interactive process of self-realization. And that's by Jake Kotze, Alan. And why don't we just talk a little bit about Jake's work and a little bit about what you think he has, if you will, and contributed to this field, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but far as I know, he was kind of one of the first ones out there that started to really open up this. He came up with the term and etc. But what's your take on Jake's work, Alan?
I think Jake is incredible. He's got a brilliant mind. Yes, I certainly Jake is the one who coined the term Synchromysticism. He was one of the early workers who really explored this subject. I know he had a similar sort of journey of coming through a very conspiracy mindset following 9/11 into something that was much more about expanded consciousness. That's I know, like I said, that's been his experience. I'm a big fan of his work. I'm going to be honest with you. What I've only recently discovered is that there's seems to be hesitation, or I don't know how to put it, some sort of opposition to Jake. And I think it's because of what you said, that last part of his quote, which is basically about synchronicity leads to a more joyful experience. And he even says in the book, his interpretation, if I could just backtrack 1 second, you said, this is a new way of looking at things. Well, a common argument is this is actually a very old way of looking at things. That,
true.
That if you went back a few hundred years, a few thousand years, indigenous people would be looking at signs from the gods or signs from nature, and they'd be interpreting these messages from some otherworldly intelligence, let's say. And so there's an argument that this is actually a very old thing. And then there is some debate as to what does it mean to correctly interpret those signs. And Jake's definition, and so again, you and I already covered this, it's subjective. It depends on the person.
That's right, yeah.
But Jake's definition, which he even says in the book, is you know that you're correctly interpreting it when it brings you the most joy. Whatever interpretation brings you the most joy, that's the correct interpretation. And I could be wrong, but I think that's where he gets some sort of opposition. People think that it's too flowery or too positive.
Right, you have to see that the Illuminati is behind everything, and it's making the world worse, basically. If you don't see that, you're wrong.
Right, if you're not miserable, then you got it wrong.
Right.
So to me, that's actually fascinating to see that there is opposition out there to his line of thinking. And I could be wrong, but I think that's sort of where it comes from. But for me, having spoken to him, having watched all his videos, I haven't read all his blog posts. He's had a few different blogs over the years. He's just a wealth of information, and just a brilliant guy, a wonderful human being to interact with. And I have no issue at all with what he's doing. And I don't mean to take it from that perspective, but just to say I've been surprised in the last few months that that I've discovered this since I've been doing the sync book. People saying, "Oh, you got Jake in there," and it's like, really? Are you kidding me? This guy is just outright brilliant, in my opinion, and I might not agree with everything, all of his interpretations. I'll be honest. I know quite a few areas in which I would maybe interpret things differently, but I'm okay with that. Yeah. That's what makes us individuals. But I would say, just as a broad statement, I think he's a great human being and a wonderful spirit, and I'm happy to have met him and having discovered his work.
Absolutely. Exactly. I mean, the point is not to sit around and agree with each other over all these things that are discovered. Again, I go back to that idea that this is about maybe teaching individuals just a way of thinking, and in one sense interacting also with reality or everyday life, whatever you want to call it. This is about opening up to a broader sense that there is something bigger going on behind the veil, in that sense. And I think that it's good that we're challenged on these points all the time, and actually open up to, in one sense, that this is a kind of a gray area, if you will. People want to put things in the black, compartment or the white compartment all the time. But I think we in one sense, we close off when we do that. It's kind of, this is final. This is what the, as we talked about before, this is what the symbol means. Okay, let's move on. Next thing, when a symbol can be argued and explored and debated, in one sense ad infinitum. And I think if people they might have a sense of being exhausted at that. They don't want to have more of the mental exercise going on. They're tired. They just want to know, okay, let me know, is this good or bad, so I can move on. Next one, kind of thing, But I say it's a really essential point there, that people are actually engaging in, coherent and, if you will, in that sense, rational debate about these things, and don't give up too soon, if you know what I mean, Alan.
Absolutely. It's sort of being rational about the irrational. Absolutely. Because a lot of the stuff is irrational. A lot of it is we have to get out of our own ways of thinking about the world, our own way. Even if you want to take it from a conspiratorial sense, we're indoctrinated as children to see the world in a certain way. Time is linear, A plus B equals C, everything just, you're told this is how it works. And even for people who do have notions of God or some higher intelligence, even that, they're given a book and said, okay, this is what this means. This is what God is. He lives here. He likes, he doesn't like it when you eat pork, or this God doesn't like it when you eat beef. He likes long walks on the beach. You got like this little handbook for the universe. And to me, it's the same sort of thing. As children, we're told what it all means, and then very quickly that starts to fall apart, and I feel like you have one of two reactions. Some people just get all the more rigid about it and say they have to hold on to that construct, and that's where you'll get people who are incredibly this reductionist ideologies, and then you have other people who say, well, let's just explore it. Let's see how far we can take this. And I think that's what a lot of the guys that are in this are doing. And I just sort of would like to make a little shift at this, because I think, we've sort of gone over this idea, and I hope that if anyone's listening, you get it. If you don't agree, that's cool. You don't have to agree. I'm going to do my best to give a few different interpretations that the authors might have. I don't want to put words into people's mouths, but you can, I encourage you to explore more of their work. So you said something about piercing the veil, and I think that's a nice segue into one of Jake's earliest things was the concept of a 9/11 Stargate.
Yeah, that's right.
And basically his idea was he noticed a number of commonalities between the falling Twin Towers, and of course the Solomon building was there at the World Trade Center site. So he's noticing commonalities between that and Solomon's temple, which has, of course, these two pillars. And he notices correlations between that, and he starts to make connections with the pyramids in Egypt. And then he notices a lot of commonalities between the 9/11 event and 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick's 2001. And something that a lot of people have noticed is that next to the World Trade Center site is a building called the